All right, welcome to this module where we're going to be working on responsive HTML and adding web fonts. Probably do web fonts in a separate video. With responsive HTML, what we're trying to do is get our one website to work for any type of browser window, whether that be a computer or a tablet or an iPhone. In the recent past, it used to be you had to build a separate mobile website, and in some cases that's still the best option. Just because it's responsive doesn't necessarily mean it's always a great experience for somebody on a smaller device. And it's just really going to depend upon your website and how many features you have on it, how many buttons, the navigation, etc. If you go to some more complex websites on a mobile device, what you see will be different than what you see on the desktop version. So they do that intentionally. But not everybody has the luxury, time, money to build a separate mobile website. So what we do is we use responsive HTML to essentially resize the site properly for the viewing width of the device. All right, so that's what we're going to be doing. Up until this point with our class website, we've been working with a lot of fixed widths, and the detriment of fixed widths is that it's going to bust on a smaller device. And normally when we build a website, we would want to accommodate for responsive HTML from the get-go. Coming back later to add responsive to your site is a little bit backwards, but that's okay. I think it's good that you learned what the basic core HTML and CSS code is before we try to take on the responsive. But now we're going to kind of add a little bit to our engineering project where we have to think about, okay, how is this going to look on a different device when we're designing our site on a desktop? Most people are going to be using a desktop computer to design the site, but are you taking a look at what it's like when it's going to display for a tablet or a smartphone? All right, let's go ahead and get into it. Here we have the class website, and you can see that in my browser, if I grab the right edge and I narrow the viewing size, this somewhat simulates what responsive HTML is. And if we had a smaller viewing device, maybe this is a tablet and maybe this gets to one of the larger smartphones, this is our website doesn't design and quite a bit of it gets cut off. So we're going to make this so that it redesigns itself for responsive HTML. If you don't already have the class exercise up, you can download that from the content area from the last module, and that's where we'll pick off, so that way you have the exact same files that I have here. Let's go to Dreamweaver, and let's go to our files. I have to open it from there. And we're going to continue to work on this about index page. Open that up with Dreamweaver. And here is all of our code. So the first thing I'm going to do is get the overall body of the site to be responsive. Right now, nothing collapses with the width of the browser window. And we're also, at the end of this lesson, going to learn a little bit about media queries. So at certain viewing sizes, different things happen as far as our style. The styles can be changed based upon those changing. And I'll get to that a little bit later. But first of all, you notice that we had put our entire site inside this div. I mean, it sits inside our body tag. You can see that it ends right there. And the whole purpose of that div, if we go to the style, purpose of that div, and where is it? There it is, custom styles, is it made our website a fixed width. Before we had this, remember, everything just stretched out to the far outside of our browser windows. Didn't matter how big your computer was, text went all the way out. So to change this is really simple. We do min or max width. That's it. So now what we're saying is you can be 1,000 pixels but no bigger than, and you can certainly be less than 1,000 pixels. So this is going to give it a limit of 1,000 pixels width if you had a really large browsing window size. But if we have a smaller browsing window size, it's allowed to become smaller. So we just change width to max width, and that's the CSS property. Let's go ahead and save that and see what happens to our website. Hit refresh, and now when I bring it in, notice that the site gets smaller. Now we had a float on our aside, and when this little gap gets to be too small, because I think this is 680, this is 300 so that leaves us about 20 pixels of gutter space there. See how when it hits the main, boom, right there, the float doesn't allow it to come up there anymore. It's now down here below the main. And that's okay for now. We'll fix all of this, and everything else just moves with it. But now we can see that our main does not collapse in size. So what would be kind of nice is when it got here, maybe for a little while, our main and our aside shrunk with the full width of the website. So let's go ahead and change that. Back in Dreamweaver, I'm going to come to my main. Now previously we had a width of 680 pixels. That's a fixed number. It's going to be that no matter what. I could try max width, but I got a better idea. So I could always try to change the property, but I can also work with the value. So instead of 680 pixels, I'm going to go 68%. So that means that the main will take on 68% of the container it's inside. In this case, that's that wrapper div tag. When we did the div tag, notice I chose 1,000. I did that on purpose so that the math would be easier. 680 pixels is the same as 68% of 1,000. Now, if you had a different container width and you wanted to keep that pixel width, then you would have to do some math to figure out what that would be. And what I've done here is I added you don't have to do this, but for my own reference, 68%. Sometimes as a developer, it's good to write yourself some notes, and you can do that with comment tags in your CSS style and say, why did I pick 68%? Oh, because I'm trying to accomplish 688 pixels when at full width, full size. So that makes our main 68%. At the same time, I'm going to change our aside. So this now becomes 30%, which my initial intention was for that to be 30 pixels. So I wrote myself a comment there as well. So now what should happen is the main and the aside should shrink in proportion to the size of our entire website. Let's hit refresh. And now as I see how they change in size. So they get skinnier. And it goes as far until I run into the width of that image. That image is keeping the main from collapsing any further. All right, so if I had brought up the website in a smaller viewing window, I would still see the two side by side, but they'd be shrunken just a little bit to accommodate for the narrow width. And there's at some point, this doesn't look good anymore, like say right about there. You can see that the text wrap gets a little strange. We'll fix that later when we do media queries. I thought I would go ahead and change a few more things before we go after the media queries. Just check my notes, make sure I'm going in order. So we've changed the body, we've changed the main, we've changed the aside. Now we want to change our images to also be responsive. Right now this image stays stuck at a certain size. Bringing up my notes. Okay. And let's go ahead and change our image. Now we have some starter styles already for our image. It's telling us we want it to float left. We've given it a margin. We might want to change the margin from a fixed pixels to ems. So 30 pixels was a fair amount. I mean, I guess that looked all right. So we can go 2M, which is now 32 pixels. Or if you wanted to be a little bit more precise, 1.875 M. And then I can always write myself a note as to what I was trying to go for. And that'll keep that exactly the same. And make sure I write my comment notes the same. And I'll go ahead and copy those margin values anyway. For my image left and image right. So anytime I have an image I want to be on the left, I would assign it the class image left. It floats to the left. I've given it a margin, and by using ems, things are going to be a little bit more responsive if the default font size changes on the device. But now I need to change the property of the image itself. Now this is going to work only if you have your image sized exactly to the pixels you originally built the image for. For instance, if right now our image should be 300 pixels. If you put a max width, if you have a max width that's bigger than that, you could always specify that it has 300 pixels max width, but then that locks every image no matter how big your image is. What I prefer to do is have 100%. So if I had a 250 width image, it's going to be 250. If I had a 300 width image, it would be 300. So that way I control the size of the image by the size of the image file itself. And I should have always been optimizing that image for the exact pixel size I want anyway, so that we can have absolutely the smallest file size for that image. If you don't do that and you're always trying to shrink your images, then you have some inefficiency there in your file sizes. So max width, I'm also going to control the height, not capital, and we're going to set that to auto. And some browsers might have auto as a default style anyway, but some may not. So what happens is you're essentially saying whatever the width is, the height should keep the proper aspect ratio. So we have that code for our image left. We'll add the same code for our image right. Notice the max width again. If we did width, it's going to be rigid. If we do max, we have a maximum size, but it's allowed to get smaller. So let's go ahead and hit save. And now when I take my browser window, at some point the image shrunk just a little bit. Now my browser window doesn't go any smaller than that, so that's why we're not able to go any smaller. But you can see that right there the image size is changing. Now we still have some spots here where I've got some text that sneaks up in here, big huge gap, and having just one word on a sentence really doesn't work too well. So we'll have some breaks that we're going to have the styles change. And there's a point where after, say, right about here, it would be good if my main became full size and my aside became full size and they stacked on top of each other. So then we go from a 2-column design to a 1-column design. And the way we're going to do that is with what's called a media query. And so I'll go ahead and stop the video there, and you can go on to the next video.